Like where the schemes go up at the point.
That's
Guys,
weird because I'm usually the one who does do that.
Oh, okay, someone,
translate, it's all-
Ernest. No, I don't want to end the meeting.
Oh, God, no. please don't.
Congratulations.
I'm gonna run it through my phone. Wah. Okay,
Just be enrolled.
join with video. Admit.
Start recording now, won't you?
There's a waiting room. I have to disable that. I know it's being recorded too. God. I hate technical difficulties. Oh, hello, Mr. Ernest.
Hi.
Oh, fuck.
Language.
Okay, can you hear us, Mr.?
Pellegrino.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it? Pellegrino?
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Sweet. Guess I'm gonna finish speaking later, Mr. Like, thank you. Welcome to DM's Guild. I think we should be good to start. We're a couple minutes late, but I think that's fine.
It doesn't exist.
Huh? You are absolutely correct. Wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about encounters. What is an encounter? Anyone have like any comments?
is when we encounter something.
That is a great way of answering a question without answering it in any capacity.
A situation you have to deal with.
Yeah, or can deal with. It's an event. Encounter, not to try to use the word in the word, is when something happens that the party has the potential of interacting with.
Yeah.
That's how I would go about it. You go to a store, that's an encounter. You walk into a mayoral race, that's an encounter. You see a forest burning in the distance, that could be an encounter. A naked man talking about fate and luck in the middle of the road who's like, you want to answer my riddle? That's an encounter. More commonly, wow, there's some goblins over there. They're coming to attack you. Very original encounter.
What about rats in someone's basement?
Did you just say something about Iraq?
Rats.
Rats.
Rats in someone's basement.
Yes, yes, rats in someone's basement, as opposed to a Middle Eastern country in your basement.
That would be very concerning. if it's
Would
the
be.
entire country in the basement.
So I do want to give some context about what we're going to be doing today in particular. Yes, we're going to be doing our usual kind of like conversations where we have asking questions and whatnot. Sorry for my lack of ability to utilize the English language.
We're used to
Just
it.
blame it on the French and the cook. So today I brought a few books, and we're gonna read them all cover to cover, beginning with this one. So, introduction. This book is written for Dungeon Masters. Okay, I'm bored of that anyways. So I've gone through these books and I've put bookmarks. I'm sorry, you won't be able to really do 100% of this through Zoom,
You take some pictures.
Pellegrino.
No worries. Thank you.
Not pictures because copyright. But we're also gonna be talking about these. I am gonna hand these around though, so people can look at the parts that have bookmarks. For the most part, these are different either rule books like the Dungeon Master's Guild, everyone's favorite, or storybooks like The Lost Mine of Phandelver, Tomb of Annihilation, few others. I'm gonna hand these around so you guys can look at them. They have different examples. Yes.
Ernest, Lost Mines is free on D&D Beyond though. So.
Yes. And we can tell you what page to go to if you wanna.
And
pull that
what
up.
was that one more time? Lost Mines of Phandelver? What was it?
Yeah, I don't know if you can read that at all.
Sounds good. I've read through Lost Mines of Phandelver and I have a few PDFs, I think, so I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I'm gonna start just by handing some of these out so you guys can look at them and get an idea of some of the different portrayals of encounters in these different systems per the authors. I will say, spoiler warnings. That goes for anyone watching the recording of this Zoom meeting as well. There will be spoiler warnings for potentially Spelljammer, Team of Lost Mine of Phandelver, Court of the Dragon Queen, the Dungeon Master's Guide, if that counts as spoilers, Tomb of Annihilation, Out of the Abyss, the Player's Handbook, also if you happen to have not read it yet, I guess. Potentially Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Monsters and Multipliers and Monsters Manual. As well as, I don't have the book here, but I have a bunch of notes on my computer because I'm actively running the campaign. Acquisitions Incorporated. It's all about doing business in
You're
D&D.
writing Acquisitions Incorporated?
Huh?
You're writing Acquisitions Incorporated?
Well, I have a bunch of stuff from it on my computer, from me adapting the module and then putting my own twists in it, and essentially a very long Google Doc. It's like 40 pages of notes so far because it's been going for a year. With that in mind, you guys will find as I pass this out that there's a couple napkins from Domino's acting as small bookmarks. Try to think what the best way of doing this is. How about I put them over here? You guys pick the ones you want to look at. From Spelljammer. It's actually going to be in the DM screen. Where there's a bunch of different kind of traveling encounters you guys can look at. Let's go with that for right now. So when you guys hear about encounters, what are some of the things that you would think of doing? Just like off the top of your head.
I don't encounters I kill.
Also, do we want to put on dim lights or normal light?
Illumination is for losers.
You're right, but I'm a species that doesn't have dark vision.
Why would you do that to yourself?
You know, mistakes have been made. It's good. Yeah, feel free to look through some of those random encounters. Some of them are on pages with tables, others are on pages that have just various things on them. These encounters could be things from like a little paragraph blurb, entire mini section. Hello and welcome. I've got some books out. We're talking about encounters, and I have some bookmarks for different encounters and different source books. You want to take a look at any of them? I think I didn't look at what people took.
How about this?
Out of the Abyss, and then you probably have the Dungeon Masters.
Yes, the
Yeah.
most spoiler heavy book in existence.
That's very spoiler heavy.
Second only to the player's handbook.
Yeah, if you want to look at any of these, we're looking at examples, encounters, and different source books. Cool beans.
Yeah, encounters are a thing. People die for that now.
People very much can die from encounters.
That stuff.
For preparing for encounters, you can do anything as small as write maybe a sentence or a few words like there's a troll on a bridge. You have an encounter right there. You could go more in depth, like for example, in this thing here, it's got Goblin Ambush. Again, spoiler alerts, if I didn't say that enough times, for Minds of Phandelver. It breaks it down from text blocks that you prepare ahead of time that you can read out to, hey, here's the goblins. If there's a special modification, like I had cockatrices. There was a room with 2 cockatrices in an adventure I ran recently that were undead. They were turned to zombies, and they were just constantly repetrifying this poor kobold in a room that every time it unfroze was trying to get out of the room. So under the little block of text by usually a little title, there was a description of what changes the cockatrice block as opposed to rewriting the entire block of cockatrice. How many times do I have to say cockatrice before I get through my statement? Anyway, but you can also have things like a development, so to speak, where, hey, if they make a bunch of noise here, something like this happens. Or, hey, there's an opportunity in this case where if the party picks this thing up or doesn't pick this thing up, it might have future consequences in a future thing. Those kind of specific details, I think, work best in a dungeon setting, which is what we'll be talking about next week. But a lot of these encounters tend to be single part things that happen to the party. They also don't necessarily need to be planned. Comments or questions so far? Back.
I know for encounters, it's first on the preview, they have tables where you roll 2d6s and then something would happen. I've run Lost Spies, I know they have a table for each like wandering around the woods, you can just encounter an owl bear.
Yeah.
So, statistic anomaly of 12 on 2d6s.
Yeah, for example, you also have dice on dice on dice. For example, over here, I've got a Spelljammer DM screen. It's got tables for wild space encounters, the astral sea encounters, ship encounters on the actual ships. Let's just roll a random dice, see what happens. 14. 14, let's say it's 1d6 leeches. So now random number of enemies that pop up. Use that random roll. They can explain maybe like, oh, you guys are traveling through the lanes. Just got out of bumper to bumper astral plane traffic. I guess you're going on plane route 99, 95. Joke about highways. Guys get off the beaten path because you're like, hey, lanes are for doofuses. We want to take a shortcut. And all of a sudden you took a shortcut straight into 6 leeches. I don't know what these leeches are, what their stat blocks are like, but that sounds like
If
it's gonna
it's
be
space, and they're probably big.
like big leeches. They probably suck too.
They get all the bad humors out of you, see. It's modern medicine.
Yeah, humor, I agree.
Yeah.
Anyways,
But what are the advantages of using a random encounter table? I'm wondering
To
because.
be fair, my philosophy, I don't like it, so I never use it.
So- I will say it depends on a couple of circumstances. For one thing, one of the times I use random encounter tables in my own sessions is if the party is about to do something monotonous and some of them say, oh, I'm gonna leave to go like grab lunch or whatever in the middle of the session. So I can do a small thing like that off the cuff. Or if the party is doing something and they're getting a bit too focused on something that's making it hard to advance the narrative. And I don't have something prepared, or they mess up something I did prepare. I can whip out a random table like that and try to spice things up, change the atmosphere, change the tone.
They're saying the main use of a random encounter for you is as a narrative counterbalance to a lull in the narrative.
Kind of, especially since one of the benefits of something like a random encounter is it provides a different atmosphere since you don't know exactly what's going to happen going into it. So neither you nor the players fully understand, hey, thing happens, and it makes it feel a little bit less railroady, so to speak, in some aspects. So it seems like they're in a world that random things actually do occur, so to speak. Words. That plus it makes it a little bit lighter on you in terms of preparation. For example, I had a group of people use a teleportation circle. They weren't sure where it was going to go. And they also were missing a couple things that I would have liked because they left the place that they were in a bit too fast. So it's like, I want them to get a little bit more loot before they get to the place they're trying to get to. So I had the teleportation circle teleport them a little bit further away from their objective than it was supposed to. And then I just had them go on a little trek. They had to go north up the road for like 8 miles and then to the right 10 miles. And that gave me time for like, hey, a few miles into the road, you guys see a naked man in the middle of the ground.
We do with it. We killed him.
It's a naked man. You answered his riddle and then he left.
Okay, forget about him.
I guess naked man talking about riddles.
We found a lot of old men on the road. I don't know what
So can give you different things for setting up. Another thing is, yeah, for the most part, it gives you extra loot, extra stats. If you're running an XP-based system, this is even more important. I saw the visual cringe there, but yeah, some people do use XP systems.
Those people are monsters.
Yes, but we still should try to talk about them and make them feel included. Short of reprogramming them to go for milestones instead, let's say they cleared a dungeon and they don't quite have enough XP and they're like close to it and you want them to be leveled up before they go into that next basement that should last only 1 session but last 4 sessions. Then you,
So this is part of the reason why I despise like this traditional like combat for XP system. Like,
well, there's other ways.
we're
to
right
get
on the
XP.
cusp of this level of power, so like. What are you supposed to do? Metagame and go kill other stuff because you know that then you'll unlock your next.
But if they're traveling and the DM just throws it at them, it's not the players actively seeking out the combat.
Funny thing about an XP, so bugs in D&D are like 20 XP, so if you went to an anthill, just destroy it, you'd get to level 20.
No, there's 0 to 20 actually.
They are.
Yeah.
I thought those like spiders were like 20 XP or something.
Well, I mean, not that,
I could
I
be
mean,
wrong, though, I'm pretty sure.
I'm gonna
It's
spawn
like-
camp the goblins.
Exactly.
it's like a creature that is, like a 0/0 creature that has some measure of attack is like 10 XP, but one that has no ability to harm you doesn't give you an XP because it's just there.
Plus they give you as much XP as the DM says. Who knows, that one bunny, because of how rare it was, it actually gave everyone 7,000 XP. Congratulations.
Now the entire kingdom hates you for destroying this rare animal.
Yeah, you're level 20, but at what cost?
You killed the king's rabbit who got lost.
The king was the rabbit, this curse.
Oh,
Anyway, but to more eloquently put why this is a big reason why I hate XP, it's the mechanics necessitating a narrative shift instead of the other way around. The narrative should inform the mechanics.
Yes. So, like I said, I tend to use milestones. I tend to not use XP myself. And I like to use random encounters primarily to change things up. Like things are going, maybe I want them to have more loot and I don't want to shoehorn them into things. More common though, rather than having a random encounter table for stuff like I roll, anyone here ever do anything with Tomb of Annihilation? Okay, I'm gonna pull this up. This is less of a random encounter table and more of, they call it a side quests section on side quests. In this case, it's a bunch of pre-generated things that, for example, help a dying man. This guy is someone who crafts dyes, like to change colors of stuff.
Oh, that's, wait a minute.
Exactly, yes. So he's trying to make different dyes and you have to help him go grab stuff to make a particular dye. So if they're exploring one part of the city, well, let's see if I can pull up the map. So this is happening in the port city. So the players are taken and they're plopped on this port, and this is how they're supposed to start at this island to try to find and clear out the Tomb of Annihilation. At this point, the players are level 1, and they should be like level 5 to 6 before they go into the actual forest. Again, this is assuming that you use the XP as opposed to milestone system. Hold your gripes though. But this makes it so they have a bunch of different areas in the city with a bunch of different side quests pre-laid out. And the players can stumble into and accept or refuse any number of those. So it gives them options. But you can also adjust, what if that person that's saying, oh, their friend got kidnapped and now you have to go on a boat journey to go clear out a pirate's cove further along the islands. They can choose to accept that, they can choose to refuse it, what they find in this part of the city versus that part of the city. So it's the idea of having things prepared ahead of time, but you don't necessarily have to or can use them, depending on the party actions. Yes? I don't know if you were raising your hand.
sometimes I just make gestures, directions.
But just want to make sure you, yes.
Right, but I'm unclear, how do those side quests aid the bigger picture of the narrative?
So in the case of Tomb of Annihilation, the idea of the side quests in this part of the book, this early phase, is to get the players to be acclimated with each other in a lower stake place, because they're just going through the port city, they're not venturing to the jungle itself. It's getting them additional contacts in the area. It's getting them additional loot and resources potentially. And then again, if you're going with XP or even milestone, depending on like how you go about these side quests, it could give them level ups.
Okay, so the side quests in Tomb of Annihilation are all just narrative setup, basically.
At least for the section of the book, if you want to look at it. So this is Luca's copy of the book. And feel free to pass that around if you want. It's another way to go about things as opposed to a random encounter table. There's a lot of different ways you can do things. You also don't have to necessarily have them be random. You could have linear ones, but linear in the sense of these things are going to happen and you just tailor how they go about happening based off where the party is and what they're doing. So there's really no limit of how you go about generating these structures.
This actually reminds me of, well, how I run my games. So I don't run any modules ever, I do completely homebrew.
Mhm.
And I run a pretty sandboxy game. I generally present the players with a lot of strings that they can choose to pull or not pull, and everything. Like, grades back into the larger narrative, whether or not they pick it up. So sometimes they'll. It's a lot of stuff to keep track of ultimately, but it's so long as I know the start and end points of like each NPC's arc as the campaign is happening in real time. I know how it can come back to bite them in the ass if, for instance, they choose to not help the dying man.
And it's real, is it actually like a dying man, like?
DYEING.
They were doing that.
Oh, yeah. The writers are clever. But again, one of the reasons why I brought so many different books is so we could look at different examples in different contexts. Another one, for example, is less seen as an encounter, but it still is. Acquisitions Incorporated. At the start of chapter 2, you enter Phandalin from the Lost Mines of Phandelver. Way too many sounds. But as the players approach the town, there's a giant crowd and a big stage with a podium set up, and there's two different people who are vying for mayoral candidacies. So that in of itself is an encounter, just not one with fighting per se. So, and that is very much a linear story where you show up, this is going to happen. This is a set of events, as opposed to a random action, or a random encounter rather, just tripping over all the words. And again, just to reiterate, for today, we're talking mostly about these. They're not necessarily isolated things, but these one-off things, as opposed to a dungeon, which is a bunch of interconnected spaces with whether it's traps, enemies, puzzles, loot. Comments, questions so far?
Yeah, so I have a travel system that kind of comes the closest to having a built-in random encounter type thing. That I use. It's just a basic overview of it, because I think you guys would find this interesting. So the idea is at the beginning of every day of travel and also every night of travel, roll a d10 and add the party's travel tension. I've got a little table here, and on like beneficial or atmospheric rolls, stuff that isn't attacking or being any sort of danger towards the party, you gain tension. And basically the total of the die roll, I've got 10. So if they'd had tension, then they might receive a hostile or an extreme encounter. But the encounter types range from beneficial, atmospheric, neutral, hostile, and extreme.
Yeah.
And I've got a few just whatever example events, like for a beneficial one, they find a berry grove, which makes it easier to collect rations that day. This was made for like a much more survival centric campaign. But in general, all of the events that I came up with, each of them is only like a couple sentences, and for some of them I made like a stat block or two. But most importantly, again, I run a tight ship. All of them have to connect with the larger narrative. All of them have to flesh out the specific parts of the world that I'm interested in.
To branch off of that, there's a system that's similar to that. It's got a lot of parallels. What do you guys consider downtime activities, encounters, depending on like what you're doing for it?
The encounters can't happen.
Exactly,
No.
they can happen
I'd say it's an encounter
if something happens during it.
if if this comes to the players, you could define it as an encounter, I'd say.
Okay.
Like, for instance, while the party was having downtime, just last session of my game, actually, the
So
local herbalist.
special, to specify downtime activities. So like, you're searching for or you're working on, or you're trying to find a particular magic item. You're seeking tutelage to learn how to use proficiency with a sword.
Okay, so you're talking about.
So like an activity,
Stuff
not,
that PCs undertake rather than
Yes.
stuff they're gonna do.
yes.
Then no, I'd say I
Yeah.
wouldn't call that an encounter.
So there's in Acquisitions Incorporated, I talk about the book a lot because I'm currently working on the module. There's a large focus on downtime as a perspective of the entire game. So I'd say roughly 50% is players on a map interacting with either characters or going through dungeons. And the other half of it, half the time, significant chunk of it, relative to regular games, I'd say, is spent on running a business. But they give you a lot of different kinds of things you could do, whether it's you're scouting an area, you're schmoozing local groups and politicians to try to find ways to get better business opportunities. I forget the full list off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch of them. You're trying to do team building stuff. You're trying to. You have more off the top of your head, but
Planning an election fraud. That's what we did.
I guess I could fall under the downtime action of schmoozing, but the idea of doing. It's similar to what you were talking about with over the course of the day, you have the tension that can yield various results from good to bad. The way they do in that system is based off the number of people you have doing it and the amount of money you're investing into the action. It can cause anything from good opportunities to arise to poor opportunities to arise. And you can go a step further than just having it be like, oh, okay, you roll the dice during the downtime and you send a party over to here and you guys found this thing and blah, 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 and then end it there. You could go a step further and maybe turn that into something where that particular player has to now interact with the NPC they're trying to schmooze. They have to show up to the location, you draw a map if you want to demonstrate. I'm gonna try and go with this, where you give them more agency at the actual location. Maybe you run a map, and if they check certain areas, they find something of interest, rather than just having it be a straight roll of the die and they either find something, they don't find something, a scouting mission, so on and so forth. So where I'm getting at with that is downtime activities can lead to encounters. And they can be something that's a little bit more impactful for characters as well.
It should be.
Yes.
I know we've been talking about random encounters sort of for like the past few minutes, but I don't know if this topic we can play with next week's, but like encounters in a dungeon that are planned, like you go in a certain room, X thing happens.
Absolutely, we have to talk about that.
It does go to digital with next week, which is dungeon thing, or we can.
It's kind of like a prelude to that anyway, so yeah, that works.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Generally speaking, at least with dungeon encounters, they are, I always plan those because it makes sense. The stuff is gonna be there. It's not just be like, unless it's a funny dungeon, it's like the cube from the cube where random stuff happens, but like. Generally speaking, same stuff in the same room, and you have a lot more creative liberty with how like. What can be there since it's pre-planned, like the players I just. Bolt through, get the gem at the end, or do whatever they need to do in their sleep. They're not gonna experience it. I know in Curse of Straw and Castle Ravenloft has like. 27 floors of stuff,
27 floors?
27 floors, unique floors, the entire castle.
That,
It's a lot. You're meant to go there many times. The big bad evil guy lives there.
yeah, I think when I played, we went there like twice.
Yeah.
Well,
We were playing the campaign for over a year. We just went there last session. It's like grab some guy and kill him. Risk and everything. Yeah.
pre-planned things, even beyond just having it be a sense of a dungeon where room to room to room. You could have it be such that here's a town. For example, in the Yawning Portal. It's a collection of different stories that were made in previous versions of D&D that were brought to 5e. The very first one is the Sunless Citadel, where the players have the ability to go to a town before heading to the actual fortress, the citadel rather. And depending on what businesses or buildings they go to, or what time of day they spend at different areas, there are those kinds of pre-planned encounters that they can have, whether it's with NPCs or they quite literally use awakened shrubs as enemies that approach you during the night. It's level 1 characters. But so you can definitely have those things that aren't necessarily random and planned. And again, they serve to either help the characters learn more about what's going on or gain some level of experience in the sense of what things should we look out for, what things work against these guys, especially if they're newer players, or what can I do with this kind of business or NPC, making the contacts. Like, hey, this person's a healer. We don't have a healer in our party. Maybe we should come here after we get our butts handed to us when we fail at the Citadel.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up how I run dungeons nowadays. So, because maybe I should save that for later. Never mind. Or maybe I should talk about it now, but because it's really just a string of encounters to me now. I don't make like a full battle map for the thing. I make maybe just a battle map for each room there's going to be a fight in, and then they just kind of trail off. And between there might be an encounter with a trap. That's how I think about traps nowadays. You encounter a trap. Maybe that turns into a fight because something shows up because the trap had an alarm or something. But yeah, like for instance, the old slippery staircase. So what hit my players with recently, like one stair is a pressure plate, and it makes slime start to ooze out of the cracks between the stairs. And also at the bottom of the staircase, a trap door opens up to a spike bed. People almost died.
So is there a dungeon like, is it like a trap town or like some pet towns?
No, it was a demonic cult's hovel. Oh, by hovel, I mean,
I wonder if the demonic cult has ever accidentally let that up. Died.
well, it's only one stair that's the right point.
Oh, it's like, okay.
Have you guys ever seen witch stairs?
There's stairs now.
Let me see if I can pull up a picture while you guys. Can you?
Yes, it's weird.
Those are the ones that are like on opposite side, right?
Yes.
You eventually go here.
This is traps as encounters or.
I guess I would, depending on the trap. I know I found a trap where I drowned in like poo water. Like it was like in Cat's Ridge, the water's full of poo and blood. And there's a trap door that drowned me in like a 10-foot poo water trap door. Yeah, so yeah.
What a way to go.
I didn't die, I got out. It's still an interesting experience. It happened twice to different party members too. It was to the Warforged, so you just like stuck there forever. Till they got out, but yeah.
Yeah, overall, I highly recommend using theater of the minds to interact with traps. Like, you have a marching order, and that's all you need.
Also, traps don't necessarily need to be a physical thing. That old man I was talking about before was effectively a trap. I can say this now that you're no longer interacting with them. Essentially, if the party context, old man is a devotee of the patron or the god of misfortune. I forget the name off the top of my head. But essentially, they go around and they try to preach the good word of misfortune. If the players are too nice or too hostile to this person, they curse them. If the players ignore the person after having started a conversation, they get cursed by them. If the players fail to answer their riddle properly, they get cursed. And in this particular case, the curse makes it so just not necessarily unpleasant, but inconvenient things happen to the player, but they can pass it off to an NPC. But something that can happen to the NPC that can't happen to the player is the inconvenient event that happens might lead to that NPC's death. Which could potentially be brought back to them if someone was good at tracking curses. But or they could answer the riddle correctly and get a boon, which is what they end up doing. So that could be considered a trap of sorts, since the players have to be careful, otherwise they're gonna cause something to happen based off how they interact with it. It's a verbal
Yeah,
trap.
good encounter is trap-like in some way.
Is getting ambushed by an owlbear trap.
Maybe scroll past the shopping.
What's up?
Oh,
So
Oh, okay.
I've seen,
Why would you do this?
Why would
it's
anyone?
supposed to be an aesthetic thing. I don't know if I can show you guys on the Zoom call here.
Oh, you can share the screen.
Just anyone who's looking at this in the future, look up Witch Stairs, just a picture of it.
There's only.
Yes, but it's also being recorded.
Okay.
Yes. That is apparently the notice.
Has anyone fallen down these stairs once?
I don't.
Probably.
I don't know myself, I guess would be yes. I just know that I would hate to try to move a person who is sick or injured up or down those stairs.
That's.
But that could also be a form of trap, especially if it's someone that has little stubby legs. So maybe difficult terrain or some other kind of thing.
That's a funny idea for an
So
encounter.
not even necessarily a trap, but like obstacle. Environmental hazard that they have to circumvent, which could also be like a river with a broken bridge. Could be something that's just slimy, gross.
I'd say a good encounter would be a really bad civil engineer, like they've already done that. They just made a building with barely bad.
You have to convince the engineer of the noble's household to not do this.
There we go, that's an encounter. Right there, a verbal encounter. Hey, guy, that's a bad idea.
But the witches will get into the house.
Or it could actually be used like in a dungeon. For example, there are tools like we IRL use. For example, 3D effects to make it look like there are potholes to get cars to slow down in certain areas. So here, oh yeah, if you want to fight in our dungeon, go ahead. The stairs are pretty much entirely vertical. You're gonna have a hard time. Like, you could try and run down them. There's a very high chance that if you run, you'll die.
Yeah, I just had an idea actually from these big gaps, kind of between stairs on the left and right sides. You could actually put like holes in there and then put skeletons behind the staircase.
Yeah, oh, no.
Correct the legs well, skeletons above and below.
You could even have it on the side of the step too, so they can't see it.
Yeah.
So also, I wanted to bring this up since I thought this was wrong book, I think. No, this is the right one. I wanted to go over some of the examples that the Dungeons Masters book, almost like Game Master. I'm used to a lot of different systems at this point. Most people call it Game Master, not in the context of D&D. I want to go over some of the things that they say. So they talk about essentially having twists. If everything you have has a twist and nothing has a twist. So be careful not to overuse things. That's pretty much flat for most cases. They give the idea of having characters have objectives, whether it's individual objectives or objectives as a party. A great example is I had two party members. One is an evil wizard, and he's out to collect any kind of arcane knowledge he can get. The other one's a warlock whose patron likes to tell them to destroy things. There's a bunch of undead creatures that he finds that have a sigil on them. The evil wizard's trying to collect the sigils because he thinks it might have something to do with being able to create an undead army that can serve him. Whereas the warlock keeps trying to destroy it anytime he finds it, because his patron said it would be funny. So every time they encounter these things, there's a race for one of them to try to collect it and the other one to try to break it. And that's a running thing for those guys. Sample objectives that the book here has is stuff like make peace between two two parties that are upset with each other. Protecting an NPC, fetch quests like receive an object. Sneak into a place, stop a ritual, take out a target. For combat stuff, I'm gonna get into that after. But the idea of having some kind of goal to guide how you want to create a encounter. Like,
Yeah, no, every encounter has to have, in my opinion, good encounters.
yeah, it's
Or
what-
I should say excellent encounters,
Yeah.
have a secondary objective than to just survive.
Well-
Like, even if you're just getting attacked, even if you're just getting attacked by an owlbear in the woods. You should contrive some other reason or to some narrative complication. Maybe it's protecting its cubs, first thing that comes to mind. Or maybe an NPC shows up and he's hunting the owlbear for some reason. Whatever, that there just needs to be a narrative.
Where the Albert
So-
turned into an
So
Albert.
word it in a different way. How do you write a story that people are engaged in, they want to participate in? Kind of have to have some form of conflict. It could be something like, I went to the store, I got coffee. Wow, that's ripping tail. I was parched, I was passing out due to the fatigue. And like everything, my mouth tasted like sand and I could barely stand because of everything. And then I saw this coffee. But I didn't have enough money, and so I had to go around begging people with my sand spitting out at them. And then finally someone gave me enough money so I could buy a coffee.
And someone bought the last coffee before I could get there.
The idea of there being there's conflict, that's a nice example, twists. But
That was only a survival conflict.
yeah.
I would go a step further in or I don't know, if we're just writing this whatever character in a novel, I guess. That was like damaging to his pride. Like have a long-term effect, perhaps.
Yeah,
Maybe
your imagination's your limit.
some sort of like initiation for some sort of secret group that you have to nearly dehydrate yourself and then rejuvenate yourself with coffee or something. I don't know where I'm going with this.
The idea being there's something that people want to or are attempting to resolve. So something happens and now there has to be a resolution to figure out what happens because of that. So some form of, oftentimes that's some form of conflict. Like example, you're thirsty, do something about the thirst. You're had your pride hurt. Well, what does that mean? Because essentially that's built up tension that can or should be reduced somehow. It's the idea that thing happens and there has to be a response to it.
What if, I know, it's clear, we turned a potential combat encounter to a social encounter, but how did that happen? The intention of setting counter that you plan turned to something else, like we're supposed to fight like an Annabelle doll lady, that was the intention, I guess. Oh, and so we made an ally after we taught her. She became a long-term ally to the party,
yeah, that can be.
and that was an unintended consequence.
Yeah, there's more than, if you see an enemy, there's more than one way to resolve that. It could be you run away, it could be they run away, kill it, it could be you try to do diplomacy or intimidate it.
Diplomatize the owlbear.
In acquisitions, one of the random events that you have could be there's a wizard who's getting roughed up by two bugbears and this easy looking human. The party, should they choose, could actually bribe those two bugbears. It's like written as part of the narration there. Like if you offer to pay them more than what the skeezy guy is paying them, then they'll turn on him for you and work for you for the day. You guys did not take that opportunity. But there's a lot of creative ways people can go about things. Or let's say you know there's a trap and you're being chased by some skeletons. Why would you guys bother fighting it when you can just let the skeletons trigger the trap for you guys? Like let's say you guys walk above the tripwire. Skeletons, they're not the smartest creatures. They might not notice that. Try to create an encounter through a means like that, or clear an encounter with a means like that, so to speak.
Yeah, allowing creative problem solving is absolutely necessary.
The problem is just not part of the table. Breaking the boundaries.
You can also have cases where like successfully finishing an encounter immediately tails into another encounter. Like I've had multiple cases in the game that I'm running where there's like someone being attacked by something and the party like intervenes in that situation. Then once the immediate crisis is gone, it then shifts to talking to this person and trying to figure out what's going on.
As a only semi awkward, does anyone have any other comments about this train of thought before I make a slightly awkward transition?
One more example of kind of a Siamese encounter I had recently. So two PCs who are rather absolutist and brutal knew that recently most of a tribe of manticores who they used, or well, the party anyway, used to be friends with, like they had a deal going with these manticores. Most of the manticores were wiped out by a force of nature and they wanted to double check that they're all dead. They encountered a helpless member of the tribe whose age I will not talk about. They killed them, and then I turned that into a further encounter by having a manticore ambush them as soon as they left the cave. They also got some lore from like this cave drawing that they made on the wall, or tying back into the larger narrative. And overall, it drove home a few narrative points for them just to get that opportunity to split away from the main party and do their own god-awful thing. And then not even get punished for it, actually. Like, they won the encounter against the Manticore, but at what cost? Like, morally.
Yeah.
Suffering from success.
Not every encounter needs every member of the party present. It's something that can be hard to execute properly, since you want to make sure that everyone feels engaged throughout it. But sometimes you can have like two people split off to go interact with one thing. Which is kind of along the lines of what you were doing there, whereas the two absolutists that were going off doing this rather questionable thing. Another example in the campaign I'm running is there's two NPCs that are both walking away, the party split. So two of them talked to one of the mayoral candidates while the other two talked to a different mayoral candidate. And they each got their own kind of ability to interact with this person, make their own understandings of them and relationships, so to speak.
That's like probably a little bit is fine.
Not for like an entire session.
Yeah, of course not. I gotta make sure that whatever is happening while the party is split in both sections of the party is like gripping and rapid fire. So that the party, you know, everyone can appreciate what's happening with the narrative. Nobody's gonna disengage and then get the party back ASAP.
So as a slightly different avenue, like we're talking a lot about encounters and like what kinds of things they could be. I just want to talk briefly about one of the times that XP actually can be helpful. Not XP in the sense of you get XP from stuff, but XP in terms of guesstimating how these things are going to go. Especially if you're using creatures that you've never used before, you don't see how they perform in combat. Or if you're just not sure how it's going to interact with the party and you don't want to run that out ahead of time. So as a rough way of balancing an encounter, they do have the table in the DM's guild, DM's book manual of XP thresholds to character levels. It's not perfect, very much not perfect. There's challenge rating 1 creatures that could do massive damage to lots of different kinds of players. But as a rough guesstimate, if you're trying to create your own kind of encounters with fights, that's on page 82 of the Dungeon Master's Manual. If anyone wants to look at that, also has it around. It's a nice way to look at roughly what a party can handle. But again, it's not perfect in any capacity. So
Just tell them what's there. Tell them what's there and give them an idea.
So when I say balance, it's not so the idea of, oh, I want to make sure that they can win this or easily win this. It's the idea of, are they just going to get flat out killed by this? Or Are they going to have absolutely no trouble and breeze through it? And I think most of the time when I use something like this, it's so I can gauge roughly how long the combat's gonna go on for. That's what I usually use, something like this. Will they survive? And about how long should it take them to get through it?
Right, I think a planning encounter is quite different. Of course, you want to know how challenging the encounter is going to be. So that you can telegraph that to the parties before they walk into it. And give them the opportunity to not walk into it. But otherwise, whatever, tell them where the dragon lair is, at level 1. And they'll know that they can't beat the dragon.
Well, unless unless they mess around and find out.
Good.
Actually,
Cases where something like would seem deceptively easy before it all goes to shit, you would just like I would leave an exit strategy of some kind to make sure that they don't actually all die, but you know, just like scare them a little.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanna make enemies who are deceiving about how challenging they are. Yeah, absolutely. Just have like hints to the party. And don't leave it up to die rolls whether or not they get the hints. Make sure that that they might be getting tricked.
like they walk into a town and the outside of the town is full of stakes with people's heads on it. And you see a lot of people in decent armor with hammers and sickles at the gates. And the first thing you do is, hi, we're merchants looking to do business here. It may or may not end well. Yeah, that was an interesting thing there. Party you have to run fast. Weren't you the one that said, hey, we're businessmen?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I told them we were business.
So, yeah, definitely have and get out hints for something that is clearly difficult. Or if you're just trying to like jostle the party, make them think that there's something going on. I like to run it such that bad dice roll don't have really terrible consequences, rather bad decisions. So like bad things can still happen if they roll poorly, but for the most part, those really major detrimental things don't happen to a lot of the characters in my games, unless they do something abjectly stupid. Like trying to remember something off the top of my head for an example of what they did. Or like, what have you done recently?
Oh, yeah, right. I told the good guy we were gonna do election fraud and tax evasion.
Oh, yeah, and now people are on alert that, hey, these guys might actually be evil, when before they were just viewed as business people. So that could have like campaign ranging effects based off their decisions. Or like how they got banned from that town because the first thing they did was announce that they're capitalists. Or my players haven't done too many really stupid things this campaign. And a separate one, I had someone say they ignored the fact that they were in the middle of a kobold den and everyone was being rather passive to them. They weren't being actively hostile or helpful. And they saw the kobold leader and the staff the kobold leader was using. And they're like, I want to go up to the kobold leader, stab them and take the staff. Now they're in the middle of a den of kobold warriors. And they just attacked and or killed the chief. Like something bad is at least going to happen to that one person. Like that could be their death, it could be their imprisonment and taken away from the party. Like good luck getting them back through peaceful means. But if players do stupid things, I give them stupid prizes.
My first time playing team. I played the video game, I had to just punch everyone I met. Yeah, that didn't go well. Maybe close plot lines there.
Last session, one of my players got caught trying to break into the house of someone who's extremely well respected by the community, and while he was able to get out of it because he was disguised, one of the other players ended up getting into enough trouble to be arrested because he was not in disguise, and when he saw that the other character was in trouble, he like openly attacked the people that were trying to catch him. That didn't go well.
There's an idea of, here's an example of a stupid prize I gave my party. Someone sold a rifle that they got from a foreign soldier who was doing some shady, like, black site business out in the woods. They sold a rifle to just some merchant in town. Things escalated a couple points before this, so they had plenty of like lead up time to this, but then like one of the local like obvious villain types, like a mobster, they had no clue how powerful he was, showed up with a bunch of these foreign soldiers like surrounding this house that they were in. I mean, one thing led to another, it was a shootout. So they discovered that the guys, or that the mobster had fallen for like a level, so when he did.
Sell the guns and merchant sold the gun.
No, so they sold a gun to just some random merchants, but here's the thing, they have to report stuff like that, like foreign firearms to the merchants guild. And that information trickles all the way up to the mob bosses.
Oh, no. Yeah, actions have consequences. That's one of the things I try to really do in my campaigns. I try to make it so how players interact with particular things has some kind of effect. If, again, they do something particularly noteworthy, that's good or bad. So one of my players made the offhand comment of, instead of extinguishing a torch, they were right by a forest that surrounds the town they're in. They just threw it on the ground. They also don't have legs because they got cursed for putting a cursed foot in their pocket. That's a separate story. But so they're being carried on the back of one of their friends. And they threw the torch on the ground and no one noticed it aside from the person that threw it. Like, do you inform the rest of the party of the burgeoning brush fire behind you? Like, nope. And then they go and do a long rest. And when they finish their long rest, hey, by the way, the forest's on fire and the town's kind of filling with smoke. They haven't figured out what's going to happen with that yet. I don't know if I have that fully figured out yet, but that's going to lead to consequences. And that's because they did an obvious stupid thing and something happens as a rational course of that stupid action.
A stupid prize was one thing.
You guys have yet to earn the prize. But yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do. Creativity is the limit. It's like a broken record for a lot of this stuff. And the biggest thing is learning how different methods and things you can do. One of the reasons why I like stuff like this because it steal ideas. I mean, share ideas.
Yeah, more on the topic of encounters. Remember, the 3 T's. I would actually know the 3 T's.
He does not remember the 3 T's.
Yeah.
Big Thursdays.
So obviously there has to be the secondary objective, the narrative twist, as it were, like whatever. There's a captive and someone's like fighting them in the corner of the room, and the captive's probably going to die unless you resolve the situation. Or from the Dungeon Crafts channel, the alchemists were right at a really important part in the alchemical synthesis process. And the lab is going to explode, killing everybody unless you resolve this fast. Personally, I mean, for some reason, Professor Dungeon Master of the Dungeon Craft channel likes to randomize how many rounds the party has, but screw that. Just tell them how many rounds they have.
I'm trying to find. There's a really nice section somewhere in this book. We keep talking for a moment here.
Yeah. Right. So that's a timer. I'm kind of blending the timer together with the secondary objective, but in my opinion, it's always important to have a timer. That kind of puts the speed of combat to like another degree of propulsion.
Yeah, so I found it in the DM's entire book here. They have a few guiding points for creating encounters. The big themes that they say you should try to do in pretty much every single encounter. Again, for Wizards Coast. You want to have some idea of, you want to create urgency, sense of urgency. Like, you guys have to do this, or you guys don't necessarily have to do this. But if you choose not to do this, it's not like it's going to wait there on your quest log for you to do like 2 years from now when you're bored and want to do an easy side quest.
Do it fast or else. There's a farm, so. There's a captain, there's a whatever.
Establishing a sense of atmosphere as well, like. They describe it as the appearance of thematically linked creatures as random encounters helps to create a consistent tone and atmosphere for adventure. So, for example, in the acquisitions I'm currently running, there's been a lot of undead creatures because they're coming to find out about an individual that can reanimate these things through a means that's not inside the regular spells of D&D. So I can create various undead versions of a lot of things and throw it at the party and give them hints at like maybe either how to go about doing this. They recently had a character die, so maybe they could use some of this magic to try to bring that character back, for example. So creating a sense of atmosphere where things make sense in the context of it. So you're not going from, wow, I'm going through this desert, we just did like 2 dungeon crawls, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of awakened shrubs. Why would an enemy like that be in this random location? So having things that make sense for the context, I believe is what they're getting at. They also suggest stuff like draining character resources. In that sense, what they're getting at is stuff like making it so they do either get injured or use their spell slots or get exhausted potentially. So the idea of they've done things and now they don't want to go out and do additional things because they want to relax and reevaluate their position. Provide assistance. This is talking about giving them helpful NPCs. You don't have to do all of these every single time, but add interest. Random encounters can reveal details about your world. It can foreshadow dangers or provide hint death. That's nothing overly groundbreaking or new. And the idea of reinforcing campaign themes, which, again, beating a dead horse at this point, unintended for you.
What did you do?
I don't know what he's accusing me of, hold it. You know, it's-
With 4 of them,
oh, do you
and then he skinned them. I tried to burn them.
Yeah. Context matters. Need that.
Sometimes. Atmosphere, yes, you're doing great with it. But again, those are just some of the things that WotC says.
Say good things sometimes.
Sometimes. Oh,
Sometimes they say, we want all of the money you're making from your fan stuff, because
let's just change the open license OGL.
And any of these does give you one. There isn't a hidden agreement. Yeah. I know your money belongs to me, it doesn't matter what we're.
I was talking about
it's it would be much easier for me to throw you into the river.
I'll do one second, I'll put myself in the room.
You.
That's what happens when you roll a nat 1 when trying to persuade someone else to not throw you in the river.
I will roll myself. I'll be one step ahead.
Yes, great. Time is it?
It's 61.
In this little gap between conversation topics, I also want to bring up, we've got what, like 3, 4? I want to say it's 3 more sessions of this for this semester. I'm going to be graduating in May. I'm not going to be able to run this next year.
What if we like kill you and make you a ghost at Vermont University Crossing?
Some of you guys will get really bored of my jokes.
We already are.
Oh, that is rude.
Wonderful. Well, should make the river easier for you guys. But yeah, so if people want to try to help out with some of the last of the sessions, if they have any interest in trying to run it for next semester, feel free to just reach out to me or Riddick. Wonderful.
I'll probably still attend via Zoom, that's a thing.
That's something.
Do it, yeah. Who knows?
Sweet.
What are the benefits to running this?
Unlimited godlike power.
You guys stand in the front and talk down to people, make a bunch of jokes. At least that's my interpretation of it.
How many do that? Talking down to people.
But no, then you can sit in the front of the room and do it, and then people laugh at you when you say it. I laugh with you.
Being in a giant room that looks like it's definitely not meant to talk about D&D, talking about tax frauders. Okay.
I believe you do that anyway.
What's the best way to commit tax fraud in D&D?
So. Your first things first, you need to find an accountant who's really good at doing it. Because I can't do it myself, I'm a lawyer in the campaign, I deal with. That's one of our long-term goals, we come to town, right, there's two candidates, one guy's a really bad guy, but he supports our interests, so we're trying to get him elected. We're trying to.
So really
We're
bad
doing-
guy supports your interest. Maybe there's some intensive thoughts.
Oh, we're all.
No, there's a good character in your party who's
Yeah, well,
writing
too.
down all these Nazi things you guys are contemplating stating.
The end goal is Oregon Parks, we gotta convert us. So, you know,
Wait,
just
who's orange?
people in our escape room united. We're gonna harvest Oregon selling for one.
They're making a training dungeon. And people
Wait,
are
you said
signing
that.
waivers that supposedly allow them to claim their bodies and their belongings upon death. Of course, because they haven't done this yet, they don't know if they're going to get legal pushback or not, but that's a story for them to find out.
Currently, we're trying to get one. So likely in Canada support the party's interests. That's called increasing voter turnout for that election. Doing that. The voting process is like really unsecure. Just put your name on a ballot and the guy you want to vote for, you're done. So like, yeah.
That's what we're asking for.
With only like 125 people, I'm sure they won't question if 250 people vote.
Exactly.
Also, I'm sure they won't, considering they're already suspicious of the vendors, question any kind of weird and
I feel like the minimum amount, the maximum amount we have to put in extra votes for the guy, that would not make it suspicious.
well, I'm sure they're not gonna be extra suspicious because after adventurers showed up, the forest around the town got set on fire.
Unrelated.
Unrelated.
Tax evasion, that's a long-term goal. It's fun.
Don't get his head off this.
That's what, we should talk about, boss encounters.
We can do that.
Um,
There should be buildup before this encounter. There should be buildup. Just
yeah,
walk in the
at
way.
least narrative buildup, if not also mechanical buildup of like, you know, whatever, melting the party with an encounter or two beforehand. So here's a concept for a boss that provides its own timer. Any old dragon, really. Literally anybody with a rechargeable attack. There's a built-in timer, you know, to kill him before his breath weapon recharges. Or equally, I once did this like souped up Phoenix encounter. And he didn't have his ability ready at the start, but instead on the third round, at the start of the third round, he like unleashes this blast across the whole battlefield. And I told them like at the start of every round, every time the Phoenix did anything, that he's charging something on him.
So, are you guys familiar with something called a gibbering mouther?
Yeah.
So they have an ability where they can spew essentially a ball of blinding juice at people. And that's on a recharge. Now imagine one crawls out of a portal and you're told, oh yeah, in about a minute, you might see another gibbering mouther come out. And there's a way to close the portal, but you also have to deal with the gibbering mouther in front of you. And you just don't tell them if there's a limit of how many gibbering mouthers will come out of the portal. That's another way you can create that sense of urgency. I wouldn't call that a boss fight. Depending on player level, you could consider that like a mini boss of sorts, because gibbering mouthers, not necessarily their stat blocks themselves, but their effects can be rather potent. 360-foot view of it. If you can see them, they gibber at you. And that has the potential of making you lose your turn. If you fail a wisdom save and then they roll high on a d8. Yeah. What other things would you suggest for a boss encounter?
Oh, actually, just give me another idea for timer. You could have a timer that isn't. Simply give them plant the idea in their head that like some NPC they like is in grave danger and they need to get back to them ASAP. And you just cheated the encounter, like that they might run away, they might try to run away, it might turn into a chase scene, like.
You walk
Timer
into,
doesn't need to be present.
walk into a room and one of the items. This is something I wasn't able to do it on my players because of how they did the encounter. But in one of the pre-made dungeons in the game I'm running, there was a mimic in a corner. And the mimic had strings tied to it, such that when the mimic moves, it moves other things around the room. So the idea being, if the players don't notice this, that they think either a bunch of the skeletons are about to assemble into skeleton warriors and attack you, or there's other mimics in the room. And they might be like, you know what, maybe I'm all set without going to that room. But for them, their resolution was one of the characters going around and they stuck their hand too close to it. It bit onto their arm, it was latched on and grappled. And then this character has a artifact level magic box that can use the flawed version of teleport and teleported it into a wall essentially. So it was phased into the wall. But that's another way you could go about that faux danger of sorts.
And enemies that try to make themselves be bigger than they are.
Illusion magic.
Definitely animal sensitive thing. I like some for-
Peacock. Peacock's a great example.
Other than some of the butterfly things, but
The color,
but like their wings look like ant, look at that. Snakes. Yeah, they do that for, I don't know if there are any enemies in any.
there are some enemies that do make themselves seem like they're bigger threats, but there's something that's super effective against those, and that is called the metagamer. Like, there's only so much you can do about that. Short of just don't give the actual name of the enemy that they're dealing with, and instead give a vague description of the enemy. Like, what can they see, and hope that they don't synthesize it based off the description.
My solution is favorite step one.
Yeah, that's another way you can do it, like, I saw one time someone, they had a troll. And to try to get around someone who was metagaming, they made it a fire troll. It was something that grew up in essentially a volcanic area. So wherever they had fire, so like fire vulnerability and whatnot, instead it was ice vulnerability, so on and so forth. Minor change completely changes how characters interact with it, and if they're relying on the knowledge they have, it's not gonna help in that case, and that's a very small tweak to achieve that. Also, that depends on if you have metagamers or not.
The metagamers is to not play with them. But
Sometimes people do it by accident, like, as you're familiar with what Beholder does.
Yes.
It's like inherent, it's like subconscious.
Like,
Not switching up, it makes it more fun. It brings back the charm to figure out how to fight a monster.
something that happens to me is a lot of my players DM their own games. So from that perspective, it's hard for me to always rely on stuff like that, since even without trying, they know what this creature is or that creature is, or they've used that in a campaign, or they've used that kind of trap in a campaign. So it's not that a lot of my players intend to game the system, but they know what the things are by virtue of having used it themselves.
I totally approve of always homebrewing monsters to some degree. This one especially if you're just playing with people who aren't new to the game. Anyway, but yeah, as for boss encounters, it occurs to me another way to add some propulsion, some narrative propulsion to the encounter is to give them an audience. In one case, close. So the specific boss encounter, that's just absolute monster of a marauder. We had a bunch of captives, and the party sort of first found the captives, and they were like, "Where's the person who captured you?" And then they showed up. So they had this audience of people who were like, you know, Yeah, exactly, cheering them on, but also so desperately wanting to be saved from this monster. But yeah, so that's a big reason to win and win fast.
Well, most of the time they say these monsters have like giant heat, you know, we'll cut them all in half. Yeah, that's the best.
The room is, the room is tricky. Star Wars.
Maybe it's like, you've got someone holding a bunch of captives who has some like. Evil necromantic thing they do where they can not one of their lives out and kill themselves, so you really gotta do this for.
Yeah, and they snuff one out at the start of every round, maybe. Oh.
Yeah.
Just multiple,
That's so, yeah. Yeah, then you have to do it quickly, or if your party has a terrible person, if they can also try to, oh, we'll just kill all the captains first.
Sorry, Jim. Hunter's life worked out so down to you guy.
Or you could have alternative mechanics. You guys know what shadows do?
Oh, they remove your strength.
Yeah, you learn that the hard way. If they hit you, they can drain your vitality, so your strength is reduced. And again, the base stat block at least, your strength gets reduced by 1d4. Now you could have variants of that. What if it's like a psychic shatter, or whatever the case is? I'm just pulling things out of a hat right now. Where instead of reducing your strength until your next short rest, does something like reduce your wisdom or intelligence. Intellect, okay. I'm not 100% familiar with Monster Manual myself.
How dare you?
I know, right? But and have things like that where more than just your health is being taken away. Kind of like a second head block. Huh?
Rust monster time. No, I think most rust monsters are a little barbaric. It really depends on what kind of game you're running. Like if it's a gritty group dark fantasy where party is trapped in for punishments, then why not throw a rust monster out? Cool.
We rest in the dungeon. A long rest too, so like full 8 hours in that dungeon.
That'd be good.
Oh, so I think, roll the D8, see what would happen. So if like roll number and encounter would
No,
happen.
I was thinking more like,
Oh,
what did you do to barricade the door? Like,
we did it.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Surprisingly, death did not happen that much. Only one giant scorpion came up. I nat 20 on ripping off the tail and it died. Yes.
Sounds like a DM was merciful.
Yeah, that was.
I'm surprised too.
One of the times I ran the Summer Citadel, there's two competing factions. There's a faction of kobolds and a faction of goblins in it. Kobolds can be persuaded to be nice to you, assuming you don't kill their chief in front of them. Whereas the goblins are always hostile for the most part. I had my party do a long rest in a jail area right before the goblin like main living area. They did put up quite the barricade, but I also gave the goblins 8 hours to prepare an ambush. So the goblins were ready when they came in. So yeah, actions have a reasonable consequences, always a wonderful thing to deal with.
So that they're gonna enact it. They allow the enemy
Enact it.
to know that they're there. And then wait, avoid.
I'm gonna sleep on this gold pile that is conspicuous in this cave. Hopefully nothing happens. We don't.
So do we want to try to go through some of the different encounters, either ones that we've made where we go through them a bit more in detail, or ones from these different books?
Yeah, that's good. Let's do some counter studies for our adventures.
Here, let me start by pulling up my document for the campaign I have with them.
Oh, it's a bigger encounter. They can be much more judgy now.
Yeah. Well, they're my adapted encounters. I
Yeah, it's good.
borrowed heavily from what's it called? The source book. Yes. Hold on.
Or actually, well, that's interesting.
Did a one shot in October. But I think the part that I liked and what my players like was the bureaucracy where actions happen on a. It was a DMP where actions happen on a play. And it was a combat puzzle essentially where like. You could like time your actions happen at a certain time. There was a pattern timer in which certain actions would happen. It wouldn't be executed immediately, like you were there having for that. But yeah. For that encounter, I knew like everyone who was playing it was like. At least knew how vanilla combat worked with D&D 5e. So kind of putting a twist on it. I think like it's a twist like we talked about. But it's kind of for players, it's like discovering, it's an active way of discovery, if that makes sense. That's on an I'm really bad with articulating words, but like you both were there, so you kind of know how that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'm curious, was that guy just a normal goblin?
It was a goblin the suit that was made him immune to the
Right,
effects.
no, it's statistically. It took like 5 rounds to be.
Yeah.
You're level 20.
Yeah, after level 25, you go one down.
Bureaucracy in the room.
Those are
Uh,
wonderful.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Since then, I have made some changes, or like made some like changes to that idea. I made like kind of the patterns, I like go for like rounds, so you get like a spell going. I made it more tighter. Also, I made kind of like red tape, or like you put red, you know, like some lines have like the tape.
Yeah.
That's just a whole ass wall. But yeah, it's like it just blocks everything, and it does not go on until it happens immediately. You cast a spell here, next turn enemy puts up red tape, doesn't go through the wall.
I like that.
Yeah. And stuff like that, kind of like make it more fun, more engaging, kind of adding the puzzle aspect of it. Make it more discernible.
Yeah, when you ran it for us, I didn't think it was too slow.
Yeah. I want to make it faster, but like tactical.
It's really nice, I like that idea.
So you could have it, just as an idea, have it be like taking tickets to the deli. So maybe there's 1 or 2 turns where those tickets are already drawn for other things. So unless someone happens to do one of those 2 lucky actions, you could plan that ahead of time. It could be an interesting gag. But until then, first turn, nothing happens because no one does the action. Second turn, nothing happens because no one did the action. And then the third turn is the action people actually did in that first turn.
Right.
And then that gets it a little bit more readily.
Happens faster, but also adds suspense.
And it's also a bit easier to do in terms of logistics than your random letters and numbers
Right.
that you're putting on the sticky notes.
Definitely, one thing I'm probably gonna pair is look at like track all that, because it is hard.
And you don't have to go through and make a single number with note for every single action, so to speak.
I think I really want to try this like. Attention combat chess encounters where like have a group of enemies, we're in a vacuum, they just do one thing. But when combined with each other, they're really kind of like. They kind of complement each other like on a chessboard. Only move like one space, nice moving down, but if you combine those, you get. Like plays, complex plays to help you with the game, kind of like that with combat where. You introduce the enemies in a vacuum, but then later you introduce them together and they have to really combine or like complement each other to make an interesting encounter. You want to try out or something I'm trying to try out. And literally, that's where you get the.
So I do have my notes pulled up for this. You guys probably are not gonna be able to read it from over there, but I wrote a little blurb here. Yeah, that's. I'll tell you guys about it. So essentially, for the context of this, this was the first encounter I had for this campaign with these players. The party had just assembled, they just introduced the names and whatnot. It's like, do you guys wanna go straight into Waterdeep and start doing like the actual, like get the nitty gritty, or do you guys wanna like see how your characters interact with one another? That's the, if you think this character is what you wanna do for the setting. I put a short title, Hunt a Sweet Roll, and I'm just gonna go ahead and read everything I wrote down. I did a lot more than what I wrote down, but I used this as like a tricky point for how I went about the thing. I said essentially, The players enter a tavern, yada yada, they take seats, yes, that's how I have it written. Hey, look, there's a gruff looking guard who is pacing back and forth. Do you approach? You lock eyes with the gentleman, and as he stares into your cabinet with unbelievable souls, someone says, let me guess, someone stole my sweet roll. The guard reaches into his pocket, and falls to the floor crying. And then I wrote, stole, retrieve a sweet roll. And then I wrote, visit a bandit camp, eat bandits. Visit a bakery, 4 goblins dressed as fairies. Invade a home, an elderly woman with 12 cats, or offer an alternative, RP. And I took that, adjusted the setting a little bit when I had the players actually arrive, a little bit of narration like back and forth besides just him coming to the floor crying. And then I expanded their actual encounter based off where they end up going to try to obtain the sweet roll. So that was the very first encounter I had for this session. That wasn't in the acquisitions book at all. And it was to be a way for them to try out. It gave me an idea of what kind of options are they going to go for vaguely based off what option they chose there, how they direct the NPC, and then how they went about fighting the things they ended up fighting.
Yeah, it's more than an encounter, it's more like a plot thread, because it's counter, I guess you could call it, branching into multiple encounters.
Yeah. But that starts off with them going into this place. Do they choose to accept it based off interacting with the guy? And now they want to recruit him to be their security, but that's a separate thing. Do you have any examples of encounters you want to bring up?
For sure. So recently I, okay, I'm gonna give as little backstory as possible. So a living dungeon called Bow went all in on like the H.R. Geiger, like fleshcraft shit.
Serious Fleshlight National Park.
Yes, exactly, actually.
Wonderful. I love that already.
Oh, yeah. So there's a few kinds of mutant that they've already encountered for other reasons, so that they're familiar with all the mutants that I throw at them initially, including the ones that were invisible and stalking them as they walk through the dungeon. But then they arrive in this room where there is just the thundering of 2 hearts, 2 giant hearts as like the main objects in this room. There are also pipes filled with steam, like crisscrossing across the ceiling. Anyway, so they enter the room, they fight some mutants because, well, they didn't use the tools that they had at their disposal to ward the mutants away. And so the hearts aren't actually a timer so much as they are just sort of ambience, atmosphere for the battle, but also one of them attacked the heart. Attacked a heart, and that had mechanical effects. The blood inside was acidic. That ended up helping them with some of the enemies. The timer was an approaching mysterious force whose footsteps were making the ground rumble. So they knew from the get-go that the biggest mutant, something they've never seen before, was going to show up in some limited amount of time. I didn't tell them how long it would be until it showed up. And it did, and it almost killed the PC immediately. It came in and shot a death beam at the player character who was flying. And well, long story short, they ended up running. They only just barely escaped alive. So.
And may I ask what preparation you did for that, just to get an idea of like
Yeah,
how
so-
you set it up ahead of time.
Yeah, so I drew an in-depth battle map. I already had the stat blocks for those other mutants ready. And actually, I didn't have the stat block for the super mutant ready. I just kind of flew by the seat of my pants for that. I was
That's what it
like,
was.
yeah, I was like, well, this Death Beam probably has this kind of DC, does this kind of damage, so I just kind of did it. And I had the reference image for it ready. I should pass that around because it's really cool. But yeah, and otherwise, I mean, I knew the reason for the dungeon to be there, of course.
It's just interesting to see different styles that how people put together stories, whatnot.
Oh, also, I didn't plan how many enemies there were going to be. I relied a little bit on Fog of War to like For round one, I was like, all right, here's this many enemies, and then I was kind of deciding between player turns, like how many more could come out of the shadows. I don't always do that, but whatever, I didn't have much time to prepare that week.
That's not for sure, bandit. So we went with bandits, start off with 4, based on how they performed against 4, added more buffs.
Sure.
Another thing that I've seen people do, which it really depends on how you go about doing it, is they don't have help for their enemies, typically.
That's been a controversial thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes for the week, every week too.
I disagree with that quite frankly.
I think it is a tool that can be used, but it's one of those things, kind of like a plot twist. You want to have that be in a spot that it's used for an enemy that's related to plot, where you want something to happen in a particular order. The way I personally do it, most of my enemies have help. Even if I don't use the exact help that they have at first. But what I will do is I give out marbles as a kind of pseudo inspiration. This is adapted from another system called Ninja Masterminds, where if people do things that are either heroic or act out something that's part of their background / their complications, they're given something called hero points, which allows them to do some kind of small modification to the environment based off whether or not the game master in this case approves, get advantage or make something have disadvantage on a roll, or give a reroll, or various things like that. So I brought that and adapted it in a manner for Dungeons and Dragons, and that's how I like to run a lot of my systems. If something happens, like, hey, they just one-shot that enemy that's supposed to be fearsome, and I think that's gonna interrupt the flow of narration, because I wanted to play a little bit longer. I have it such that the enemy doesn't take that amount of damage, they still take some damage, and I reward that player who rolled really well with one of those. So they have the ability to change down the line to fit them. So essentially, I reward my players if I cheat to try to build narration.
Interesting. I'll do it that way.
Sometimes I overtly cheat, and if they catch me, I also reward that.
So yeah, personally, I would never reward the players for pointing it out when I've read the rules. I mean, of course, they may, but I'm not gonna reward
It's
them for
on
it.
how I then.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I've never thought of doing it that way. Personally, if a boss I have gets just whatever, blasted down in one turn, sometimes I just take the L. I'm like, all right, whatever. If it's, narratively permissible, but if I need this thing to survive for a while, because we need like some sort of narrative climax here. Second stage, baby. Second stage, it comes back and it's stronger. Or another one shows up. That one was like, if it's like a specific guy, like, oh, this is the Beetle Butcher, he's the one who's responsible for all these massacres. No, that was an imposter. Or there have been 2 levels.
Baby, that was
Did
a
I
baby.
think you're really bad, that you killed his nephew?
Yeah, it's like,
You know
the one
what
who
your
kills the baby,
older uncle.
and the one comes with the mama, it's like, oh shit.
Canine cruncher.
Yeah, so that's another huge advantage of like sort of lower fantasy settings where not everything is, what's the term, speciated, where not everything is a species, but some are just, the manticore. Then you're like, well, shit, it turns out it was a species, here's mama,
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can go about things, especially mixing them together is often what yields one of the best results. Like multiple different ways to handle. Party does A, you can respond to it like 99 different ways. If you're switch it up, so sometimes you do this way, sometimes you do that way, instead of always being the same response. It'd be a good way to increase the longevity of somewhat interests.
For the health, I just do max health. Because it's always the highest number, and also, I have buff enemies with exploitable weaknesses that have. So it is fair.
I always forget that 5e technically allows you to roll out.
I do max health, but
I usually don't. Usually don't. Help. I either take the number that they have, or I pick the desired number from the range as opposed to rolling. But it's something you could do if you have like 7 different enemies. And personally, I would rather spend my prep time doing other things than figuring out Goblin 1 has as much health, Goblin 2 has as much health, this is where they are on the map, so on and so forth. Instead, I try to figure out like, how are they going to have a chance of successfully rigging this election? That way, there's an avenue to them actually doing it where they aren't seen as evil and thrown out from the corporation and hunted down when campaign burns.
That's not your job. Your job as the DM is to
Well-
provide situations. And it's the
Well-
party's job to figure out how to get out of them.
Well, I want to, this idea of, I want to find situations they can also push themselves into.
Well, they put themselves into a situation. They've made themselves seem evil.
Yeah.
I mean, they did their job for you. I mean, your job for you. But yeah, I mean, obviously, sometimes you want to, continue the campaign.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm looking at.
Yeah, but my kind of topic of inspiration, because you brought it up, personally, how I do it is magnificence. So when someone does something awesome in like role playing or figures out some awesome mechanical thing, it does something awesome. I grant the party a point of inspiration or magnificence. I'll end up calling it inspiration as well. I mean, it works just like normal inspiration. Reroll a thing. Rather than give yourself advantage on it because it's just statistically better. However, the majority of the party has to agree to allow you to use the magnificence. So it ends up getting saved for stuff like, the boss's turn is next, we have to kill it now. Or I just crit failed a death save. But yeah, they don't get many.
For me, it's a little bit the opposite, but there's reasons why. And acquisitions is meant to be a zany, wild, non-serious campaign. Even if you look at the artwork for the book, it's a bunch of cartoon people that are caricatures and things that are weird. So the entire premise of that one is things are funny and odd. So at least for this, I'm very liberal with giving them out. Like, I tell a joke at the start of the session, and then based off how people react to the joke, I give them different numbers. Like the very first time, very first session, couldn't use this more than once. I told them a joke, like, rate that on like scale 1 to 5. And based off how they rated the joke, I gave them that many marbles. However, the marbles don't carry over to the next session. So I'm very liberal with giving out these marbles, and I'm also very liberal with what I'll let them do with them, where they can say any number of things. One of them is a bard, and they like to use vicious mockery. So, and the most recent session with the gibbering mouther, they're like, I want to spend a marble to try to guarantee a critical hit to say the absolute worst insult to make this gibbering mouther like seek back into the portal. So I say, sure, he rolls and whatnot. And then afterwards, he's like, so what happens? Like, you realize that gibbering mouthers don't have ears. So it does nothing. So I don't use it as like a guarantee they can do whatever they want. But then later on, his character stepped on a bridge and got attacked by 2 packs of flies. They immediately bring him down to 1 HP. The party fails at killing one of the 2 swarms by the next turn. So if both of the swarms hit him, he'll get knocked down and then he'll get 2 death saves. So he'll be very close to dying. Him not wanting to risk that, he goes like, can I try to, he's a warlock, can I pray to my patron to get a restraining order to stop these flies from killing him? So he gives me all of his marbles, and then the rest of the party one by one goes, I'm gonna give all my marbles to this, I'm gonna give all my marbles to this, so they all give their marbles to try to have him pray to his patron to stop these flies. So
Really good.
I had, that's when I had him float up into the air, his clothes flew off like an anime like girl transformation. And he said it in a voice other than his own voice, so his patron essentially is acting as conduit, as warlock. Says, Nat today. The clients. And he points at them. And his patron is that which endures, which is all kinds of like mutations and all kinds of eldritch, whatever the case is. So the flies start individually falling to the ground as they're mutating. Their legs are turning into antenna. Their wings are turning into legs. Their antenna, whatever the case is, they have eyes growing on their butts. And they just start dying. They all fall to the ground. And then he collapses onto the bridge naked in a stupor. And all the flies are gone. So I'm very liberal with it, but that's because of the idea of this campaign is too easy.
We are suing, we are doing. Presently, stuff people would do in real life in a corporate setting. Such as tax evasion.
Well, we did just tell the person who's a representative from head office about said tax evasion, so we'll
There's
see
this
what
thing-
happens from that.
Well, I mean, there's ways they do it. I want to.
Anyway,
Yeah,
So, yeah.
you've been addressing response to that, I think. So going in the total opposite direction, what if you wanted to run a super gritty campaign, how then to handle stuff like inspiration? So my solution, I made a game called Silence the Sepulchre. It's not published or anything, I'm playtesting it. And it's kind of tapping into the whatever gritty survival horror OSR type genre. So instead of inspiration, yeah, there's no way to earn inspiration. Your reward for doing well is surviving. And goal. So instead we've got desperation dice. We call them that because we want you to say that you're desperate every time you use them. So you've got 2 desperation dice. Anytime you make a die roll, it doesn't matter if it's attack damage, whatever the hell, you can add a desperation die to the roll. It's very simple, and people don't have much in the way of class features. So this is like a mainstay mechanic that they're relying on to stay alive. But you just gave me the idea that totally, like, people should be able to pile their dice on for their friend. And spend their own desperation dice on.
your idea with the desperation dice reminds me of another system. I forget the name off the top of my head. I got into tabletops from my uncle who's been playing them since the early 80s. There's a system that he used to play all the time back when he was our ages. I forget the actual name, but essentially there was this idea of you have a certain value of luck. And if things go poorly, you can choose to expend your luck. But once you run out of luck, then at any point, whenever you're doing anything, since you're no longer lucky, you've used up all your luck, the game master can do any unlucky thing they want to you, and you have no way to counteract it because it's just your bad luck at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, you have,
So maybe they got the idea from this one because that's what's from.
like, you have the ability to do like 7 points of luck, I think it usually is, and you can spend it to either like make your roll the highest possible total or negate any harm you just took, but you get like a short-term consequence from it, and then if you burn all of it, like GM can basically just screw you over whenever if you aren't constantly taking adequate preparations for everything.
Yes,
That's a little too brutal for me, like, I feel like that just opens the gate for bad DMing, honestly.
I mean, there's still I didn't really use the whole like screwing them over thing, but it definitely has a sort of like timer of at some point this character is going to have to give up the world of monster hunting because they don't have any like way to get out of like terrible things happening to them. So it's sort of like picking.
It doesn't replenish at all.
You can get like one as like a you can get a single point back at one point unless there's a certain like playbook, which is the class equivalent. I can get like 2 back, I think, or more than that, but yeah, it's just you have the 7, you can get 1 back. Then it's
awesome. It's even more hardcore than my desperation dice, because they restore like at the start of every scheme. Which could be like the end of the dungeon or whatever. But it's a really good idea actually. That like over the course of a campaign, make the party feel like they're running out of Fuck.
I have a related tangent. Yes, oxymorons.
Aren't tangents always related though?
Yeah.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not.
It wouldn't be a tangent.
Has anyone here ever played a game called Pokemon?
I love Poking Man.
Seems like the most.
Pokemon can be quite entertaining, especially when they don't know it. So, something a lot of Pokemon games have is the idea of a rival individual. It also includes something like that as like, especially in a setting like acquisitions where they're a business, could have a rival party. Something that they don't always interact with, but they're growing their own sphere of influence and power in the background. This is something I want to do with a different group of acquisitions, not you guys that we're already so far in. But the idea that you come across these groups and occasionally you guys have to try to compete with them. Maybe you guys win, maybe you guys don't, but it's that idea that there's this other or groups who is able to grow and increase their base as the parties are going on. Helps increase both the idea of immersion and the fact that the world's dynamic and is more than just what things that they're actively doing. So it can be an interesting way to, or an interesting narration tool. And you could probably create a number of nice encounters out of that. Like maybe you guys found priests and both groups are trying to convince the priest why their group is the one that the priest should lend their aid to, or insert any other kind of job here in person.
So as the saying goes, or as the mantra goes, the villain acts, the hero reacts. And having an anti-party, way to do it. So once I made an anti-party by literally asking everyone, what are the 4 traits that define your character? And then I inverted them for like the polar opposite character.
So they wear aluminum foil hats. That'd be a little too much on the nose.
But that's the thing, I mean, the foil doesn't always have to be the opposite, but anyway.
Yeah,
So like, for instance, whereas the party member Zalia was brave, Caspian Fargrove was cowardly, generous, turned to greedy, quick tempered, turned to calm, uncharismatic, turned to smooth talker. And then to top it all off, I sort of formulated a descriptor for their archetype. So Zalia is like the party mom, and she's also like a demigod. So Caspian becomes just a crook, just a down and dirty blackguard. Anyway, so that went pretty well. Somebody lost an arm in that fight.
good thing they have 2.
Yeah.
You're not anymore.
Add 2, you're right. All that, I said that unironically in a French homework I did recently. There's a short story where a dude was surrounded by beauty all of his life, and then he wanted to marry someone ugly. He's a prince. Most beautiful woman approaches him. Then she becomes the most ugly thing in the world. He marries her once she becomes ugly, and they go on to have ugly kids. I noted in my homework, like, what did you think of the story? It didn't make sense because the ugliness shouldn't have been an inheritable trait, because it's something that happened while they were alive, not a genetic thing. It's like if you cut off your arm and then you go have a kid with someone, the kid has 2 arms.
Was this story perhaps written before the advent of Darwin?
Was adopted Chinese legend in 1999. So it was adapted from a Chinese legend and it was written in 1999 in French. But
Reminds
yeah,
me of my crashing.
I died, my parents.
I want to give the 2 NPCs a loaf of bread and we'll see what happens.
That's how it happened. That's what my parents explained it to me. Okay.
So another example of like an anti-party type member. So I was talking with a player about their PC's backstory and like some NPC hooks I could give them, and we decided because they're like a magical girl, they needed to have a for one, they needed to have a love interest, another magical girl, of course. And for 2, they needed to have a rival who's also a magical girl.
What is the
Well, guess
rival?
what?
This is
They're
rival
the same thing.
Yeah.
So Nina is like this, it's like really mild mannered, like not snoopy, not trying to get it in anyone's way, always feeling like she's underfoot, super modest. And her inverse is like this aggressive, mischievous, super proud person. And whereas Nina deals with being like a tall person, by just trying to escape and disappear. Her rival, whose name I'm forgetting, has a personality that's like bigger than her body, but she's about the same size.
Yeah, it really comes down to creativity. Also, I said this in the past, if people have questions, like they're not sure, how should I go about interacting with this thing that popped up in my campaign? Do you guys have any ideas for this? Or this character is wanting to do this thing with it? Or this player's wanting to do this thing with their character, but I'm not sure how to incorporate it. The Discord can sometimes be a good place to get good feedback.
And I'll always respond to that stuff.
Like, I've got a character who we killed off, who, while they are dead, we're still planning on doing something with this character. And it's just a matter of figuring out how we want to go about it. So if you were to resurrect a character and give them sentience again, what kind of traits might you add to them as a result of being resurrected, kind of like a lich of sorts?
So are they actually a lich or not?
They won't be a true lich, but they're going to be, they're a wizard, a chronomancer wizard right now, Yuan-ti. And they're going to be resurrected as an undead Yuan-ti. With full
Resurrected them.
It's not resurrected as all the spells that are there current. It's through a similar thing that's causing a lot of the other enemies in the campaign to be resurrected, some atypical ritual. So it's through some kind of otherworldly magic that's bringing them back to life, where like they're in a space between life and death, effectively undead and sentience.
I feel like I need more information
Yeah,
about.
I
flavor
can
of that
I
thing.
can message on Discord.
Sure, yeah.
I posted something alluding to that at one point earlier, didn't get the feedback I was searching for directly.
I
But
asked about scare one abilities.
Huh? no, like I used an example of a caterpillar becoming a fly and what kind of racial traits would happen to that. But I was too vague apparently with how I worded the question. And only responses I got were people talking about maggots and what kind of traits butterflies would have and stuff like that. So they kind of missed what I was trying to ask.
Yeah, that actually inspired me. I'm kind of working on this sci-fi setting. We're gonna call the game Release the Robot. You inspired me a metamorphosing species playable. They're like axolotls, but also like butterflies. They have 3 life stages. There's like tadpole, and then there's semi-aquatic or amphibious, and then they grow wings. But they're like axolotl people. Anyway, thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, from that question in the Discord?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is another great reason why I try to have stuff on the Discord. There's also species in acquisitions. There's a race of goblins that got mutated by
Yes.
on level 5, they become medium creatures. They go from small to medium creatures.
Yes.
And my party's about to hit level 5, so one of them's about to get a lug up on the world.
You should give them a, like, just
Well-
wake up and something their closest or precise street.
Well, right now they're missing their legs because they put a cursed foot in their pocket. So I don't know how much height they're actually gonna gain.
I mean.
They've, what is it? They've working.
So larger.
Yeah.
The torso and the arms, but
Yeah, that's true though.
so they found a workaround with the corpse where they could magically put the 4 legs of quadruped animals on them. So they were running around with squirrel legs. And now they've got jackal legs, so they're trying to walk around. It gives them some disadvantages moving.